So today we're going to talk about cannibalism during normal times and during SHTF. I see a lot of information flowing around that's not very accurate on this subject. And one thing that I noticed is there's a huge amount of questions about it. People ask me things about this. And a lot of the material that was available on cannibalism last century has disappeared from research sources in the internet. Back in the 1990s, I read a report, and it was a statistical analysis of cannibals in the United States based on population data and their number. And I can't remember if it was a CIA report or FBI report or Rand Corporation report, but this was basically a summary of federal government data which predicted the amount of cannibals that actively hunted people and cannibals that were associated with them that did not hunt people. And all this information, I can't find it anywhere on the net anymore. It's all gone. And what you're going to find out is, if you can ever find that study, what they deduced was in normal times, 1 out of 50,000 people actively hunt other humans to consume them. And then 1 out of 5,000 people will practice cannibalism if they don't have to kill. So if you do a little ratio on that, what you kind of find out is, on average, in a group of people that practice cannibalism for various reasons in normal times, that means that one person actively hunts, kills, and processes humans, and there are up to 10 or 12 people associated with that individual that eat the proceeds of that activity. Now, there's a lot of reasons for cannibalism that are not discussed. There are religious cults that practice that. There are people that have psychological illnesses. There are people that basically act as if they count coup and they draw power from eating organs of dead people. Then you have people that actually like eating humans. But the vast majority of the people in this study are psychopaths and religious cannibals. Now, the research data separates out this group of people from others. So when you look at the data and studies that are still available, you have categories of cannibalism. One of them is religious, and that breaks down into several reasons for that, which I'm not going to go into. If you want to know about that, you can research it. The studies are available. Then you have starvation cannibalism, and that's broken down into wartime and political. So political cannibalism is caused by famines, and those are areas such as the Great Revolution in China, where they pushed all these people out of the city back to the country and thought they were going to be farmers, and it caused mass famine. You can look at North Korea and cannibalism practice there. In military cannibalism and war, you can look at the Japanese examples in the Pacific Islands. And survival cannibalism is the last one, where you're looking at people that, for instance, the soccer team that crashed in the Andes, they ate people because there was no other source of food. Another example is the Donner Group in the mountains, in the Rocky Mountain areas. So when we look into this, they make a distinction between cannibals that prey on non-kin. So what they would call a survival cannibal or a religious practice cannibal would be one that would prey on people not related to them. And then you have psychological patients, which would prey on kin or people associated to them. Now, one way to think about this is in your area study, you need to keep in mind if you're near large population centers, cannibalism is already going on right now. In SHTF, it's going to be even worse. Because if you look at the differentiation in populations, if you have 1 out of 50,000 actively hunts people, but 1 out of 5,000 will eat if provided, the opportunistic cannibal is one that's going to eat recently deceased people in SHTF. That'll be the bulk of them. And then you'll have a smaller organizations that actively hunt people. Now, what you're going to find is in current times, the hunting cannibals do not use firearms for the most part. They kill by ambush and deception. And they use physical and primitive methods to kill people. So without using firearms, that's a good way that they don't give themselves away. The other thing is our psychological profile shows they're an extremely intelligent, very deceptive, and very dangerous. So you need to keep that in mind. Now, one thing that has never really happened in the literature, at least in the non-classified literature, is anthropological studies of primitive groups and the remains of people over the millennia. There's been a lot of analysis of groups that practice cannibalism and the effect of it on the human body, the methods and the way they did things, and it's never been extrapolated into the research on modern cannibalism. So if you do that extrapolation and you relate it into what would happen in SHTF, there's some correlations you're going to find, and that will help you identify groups that have a high probability of practicing cannibalism. Now, when I was a kid, AIDS was unknown. I worked for a real estate company in Chapel Hill, North Carolina when I was young in the 70s, so around 78, 79, 80, 81. And that's when AIDS really hit the gay population. And there was a mass die-off. And I cleaned up a lot of the rental properties and homes from the victims of the AIDS epidemic. The other thing that I noticed is we used to have 3 or 4 hemophiliacs in every school. The contamination of the blood supply killed all those hemophiliacs off in mass from the AIDS virus in the blood supply. So if we look at that example, what you'll notice is in SHTF, the people that cannibals are going to eat you're going to have a high percentage of the population that has AIDS, hepatitis, and other bloodborne diseases that were not present in ancient times, from which the extrapolated data comes from on the effects of cannibalism. So what you can expect is populations with a high concentration of AIDS, hepatitis, prion poisoning, the various types of chronic wasting diseases. They're going to be concentrated in cannibal populations. Now, what's really interesting is a lot of the anthropological studies found that with cannibalism, human flesh is around, and muscle is around 70% water. When you look at the game animals people would have ate in comparison, they had 40 to 50% water content. So what that tells you is a population cannot sustain themselves on a steady diet of human flesh. They have to have other inputs in order to survive. So if you have groups that are subsisting almost totally on human flesh, they would experience something similar to rabbit starvation. Because if you look at rabbit starvation, you don't have enough of the nutrients that you would get from red meat to survive. So it would be a slow starvation. So when you're looking at populations that are practicing cannibalism, but they're hiding it, you can see a lot of these medical issues in that population. This should be something that you are doing in your area study. When you're interacting with groups, you should be looking for some of these characteristics. Now, the last thing I want to tell you is about evidence collection. If you're around areas and there's a lot of hunting going on for animals, and you suspect there's some cannibalism involved. I once had a psychological patient I was interviewing tell me that if he put a pile of deer guts on the ground and a pile of human guts on the ground, 99% of people couldn't tell them apart, which is true. Very few people can look at organs of animals and humans and tell them apart. But that is a skill you need to have, because if you're finding that kind of material laying around in SHTF, you need to be able to tell what it goes to. The other thing is, in anthropological studies, the main evidence is the cut and scrape marks on bones. So if you can identify human bones, that's the hardest part of a carcass to get rid of. So a few thoughts, a few clarifications on questions people have asked me in the past. Please share your thoughts. We'll see you on the next video.